Hey everyone,
Hey everyone.
welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Today we're going to be talking about financial independence and semi-retirement as a travel therapist. So we've been uploading some older videos recently. Facebook's doing this thing where they're going to take away all the old videos. So Whitney's been downloading all of our old videos from years ago and uploading them onto YouTube. And one of the videos got some attention. It was one that we did 5 years ago on financial independence and semi-retirement. And so people were asking for an update to what we're doing now and um, like how our life has changed, especially now that we have a baby and everything, how we're handling semi-retirement these days. So we wanted to make a video and update all of you guys on that. So Whitney's going to introduce us and we'll get into an update on our semi-retirement life.
All right, thanks for joining us. My name is Whitney.
I'm Jared.
And Whitney and Jared Casazza, we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We've been travel PTs off and on for about 10 years now. And we first started travel therapy when we were new grads in 2015. And we're going to tell you some about our lifestyle and what we've done with travel therapy in our 10 years up until this point, and how we use travel therapy to achieve financial independence and semi-retire early in our careers in our 30s. I think I was actually still in my 20s when we semi-retired. So yeah, a lot of you guys may follow us and know some of the story, or you could be brand new to our page and this is the first time you're hearing about it. So since it's been like 5 years since we did a video about this, we figured it was time for an update anyway. So get ready to dive in and learn a little bit more about like what financial independence is and what semi-retirement is and how we've used our careers as physical therapists to achieve that.
Yeah, and some of the new people watching, you might not realize, but when we first started like Fifth Wheel PT and Travel Therapy Mentor, like the focus was more on financial independence and not even as much on travel therapy. And that was like my main thing I wrote about for years. And I've tracked every single month my finances since I think it was like March or April of 2016 until now. I still do that every month. So yeah, this is something that I feel like we talk about all the time, but now looking back, I'm like, wow, we haven't talked about this for 5 years. It's kind of crazy how fast time goes by.
Yeah, and when Jared says Fifth Wheel PT, if you're not familiar, that was the original blog that Jared started in 2016 when we had only been traveling for maybe like 9 months or so. Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist, because we were living in a fifth wheel camper at the time. And back then, that doesn't feel that long ago to us. That was, 9, 10 years ago. But people weren't really using Instagram and Facebook and social media the way that they are now. TikTok didn't even exist. So, there weren't a lot of people out there writing or talking about what they were doing as traveling healthcare professionals. So we started a blog talking about traveling in a fifth wheel camper as travel physical therapists. And the big thing for Jared was talking about his road to financial independence at that time. So if you've never visited our blog before, that was really what started it all back before Travel Therapy Mentor. So as we get into talking about some of these financial topics, we don't have, all the time in the world just for this one video to talk specifically about what financial independence is and how you achieve it and all that. We'll go into it a little bit, but if you want to learn more about that, if this video inspires you to learn more about finance and financial independence, definitely go check out Jared's blog posts going back many, many years about all the nuances of that.
So financial independence in general, the definition, I would say the generally accepted definition is getting to a point where your investments are able to cover your life expenses without having to work. And so when we started traveling 2015, I had already spent a few months like pretty deep diving into the world of financial independence and wanting to achieve that as quickly as possible. And travel was the fastest way that I knew of, and still looking back now, I think it is the fastest way to get to financial independence as a physical therapist or occupational therapist, speech language pathologist. So once you get to a point where you have around 25 times your annual expenses saved and invested, then by most definitions, you're financially independent because you can live off of just 4% of your investments indefinitely. And so, yeah, that was our goal. Our goal was to get there within 5 years. Or for me, to get there within 5 years, and actually got there a little bit less than 5 years. So now that was around 2019. So it's been about 6 years since I got to that point of financial independence, and then what we transitioned into our sort of semi-retirement life.
What's interesting is Jared had kind of always was interested in finances. From what I understand, he tells me growing up that he was always interested in finances. But definitely when we graduated physical therapy school, I think what really sparked him to start looking into this was student loans and what we were going to do about our student loans and how we were going to get ourselves into a good financial position. So he discovered financial independence, and this is a whole community. I don't know if you've heard of it. And if you haven't, maybe you'll dive into it now. But the Financial Independence Retire Early Community, or the FIRE community. And so he started reading a lot of blogs, listening to a lot of podcasts, and he was hearing how all these different people in different professions were using these principles of personal finance to get into a good financial position in order to retire early. And he realized, wow, we can actually take what we have available to us as physical therapists. We can do travel therapy, and we can achieve financial independence quicker because you can earn a higher income as a travel therapist. And then along with that, he was like, we could retire early or even semi-retire, where we start taking more time off from working. Instead of living a traditional life where you're working, 50 some weeks a year round until traditional retirement age. So we kind of melded those two things together. And it was very interesting to me. I'd never heard of any of that before, and maybe you've never heard of any of it before, and this could be the first time you're hearing about it. So it's pretty interesting the way that Jared, learned all this from this different realm and then combined it with what we do for work.
Yeah, and thinking about it, like that, obviously, like when you said, learning about finances and financial independence and all that stuff, a lot of it did start with student loans. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? And should we invest? And how do we invest? So that kind of took me down the rabbit hole initially. But then when we kind of had an idea that we wanted to travel anyway. And then I was like, wow, travel is perfect for that. You make more money. You have this, you can take time off. You have this flexibility that people in permanent jobs don't have. So it's like the perfect way to, hustle for a little while and then get to a point where you're taking 3 months or 4 months, or we've taken 9, 10, 11 months off before. So it gives you the opportunity to do that, where if you had a permanent job, you can't just leave your job for 3 or 4 months if you want to.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into more of like what our definition of semi-retirement is and what that could look like for different people. If any of you guys are watching live, either on Instagram or Facebook, we'd love if you'd say hi in the comments. I do see quite a few of you have tuned in. We would love to hear from you, or if you watch later on the replay on YouTube or listen on our podcast, let us know you're watching. We'd love to know, where are you at in your journey? Are you a new grad? Are you a student? Are you a clinician that's well into your career? Have you started looking into financial independence before? We'd love to know. And we hope that we can inspire you just to think outside the box a little bit than the traditional career path. Yep. So as far as semi-retirement goes, there's lots of different definitions of that.
And honestly, I started using that term in early 2018 when we were thinking about taking a 5-month trip. Started writing about semi-retirement, and before that I'd never heard anyone use that term before. I just kind of made it up, but then now I've seen a lot more people use it in different ways. But for us, that meant just taking half the year off. So we thought, okay, we'll work half the year, take half the year off, travel international, travel domestically. That was our version of semi-retirement. But now I've seen a lot of other people talk about semi-retirement in like terms of working part-time, or working half time. So it's like, you work 20 hours a week, but then you have the other 20 hours a week off as a retired, calling yourself retired that way. So yeah, there's different definitions. You either are working less or working less hours per week, or working less weeks per year. I would say those are kind of the two different ways that you might think of semi-retirement.
Yeah, it's funny. In other professions, it might be strange for them to cut back their hours so much. I think in the therapy and the healthcare world, we're just like, oh, then you go PRN, like you go part-time. It's pretty typical kind of path that way. But yeah, we did it pretty extreme, where it was like we were going to work 6 months on and completely take 6 months off from work. And then it actually progressed. We did that for 2 years, I think 2018 and 2019. And then basically, actually 2019, it might only have been 3 months on and 9 months off. And
we planned to do it for like 2018, 19, 20, 21, but then COVID kind of messed everything up. So then 2020 became like this weird thing where we were just working part-time, and we couldn't take travel contracts, we couldn't travel internationally. So we planned to do it a lot longer, but it ended up being pretty much just 2018, 2019 that we were doing 6 months, 6 months on, 6 months off, or I think, yeah, we did like 3 or 4 months on and took the rest of the year off.
And then basically the last several years, it's been like 3 months on, 9 months off, that kind of thing. So it's even evolved further than what we thought. And so, spoiler alert, we actually got into a lot better financial position than we even anticipated back when we started making plans, to the point where now we work even less as physical therapists than we ever thought we would.
Yep.
So yeah, so that's a little bit of just kind of background.
And then some reasons why you might want to retire or semi-retire young. So I wrote an article, I guess that's been like 4 or 5 years ago now too, about why I think it's a good idea to semi-retire as a younger person. There's a lot of reasons, and it depends on obviously your own circumstances, but mostly it's time flexibility. So like the most important thing in your life is your time. And being able to choose what you do with your time is obviously the biggest form of freedom that you can have. So I think some version of like either working part of the year or working less hours per week so that you have more free time to do what you want to do, whether that's travel internationally like we did, or domestically go to all the national parks like we did, or just have more time with family. Like that's evolved for us over time. We started with this semi-retirement definition of like 6 months on, 6 months off, and then it now has become more of the less hours per week. So we still work on our business, but we have a lot more time off to spend with our daughter and with our families and do things that we want to do. So, for everybody, it's going to be different, but yeah, you might want to travel internationally and take time off, or you might want to spend more time with your family, or you might have some hobbies that you really enjoy. Maybe you really like woodworking or art or something like that. And you can't make a lot of money from that, but if you can figure out a way to save aggressively early on and then take more time off to do the things that you really care about doing.
Yeah, and we've also talked to some people that maybe they are looking to build some kind of business or side hustle, or they want to transition into, opening their own clinic or starting their own online business or something like we did. And so that also allows you the flexibility when you're taking time off from a traditional 40 plus hour work week. It gives you the time and space to create and do something new. We've talked to a lot of people that utilize travel therapy in that way. So then they have time to create the thing that they're trying to make the next phase of their life. But also we've talked to a lot of people that just utilize it in this way because they want to avoid burnout. Instead of having, they love being a physical therapist, or they love being a nurse, or another type of therapist or healthcare professional, but they don't want to have to do it all the time. And so if you utilize travel therapy in this way to where you can take more time off and semi-retire, then you're less burnt out in your profession.
Yep. You want to read that comment?
Yes, we had a comment come through on Instagram. Hi, I'm Natalie. I've been a PTA for 4 years, and I'm quitting my job in August to start my travel therapy journey. You guys have given so much good information for me to feel good about this decision. That's awesome. That's so good to hear, Natalie. And, we've been writing in this space again for like 9 years, and we've had travel therapy mentor for 8 years, 7 years. 7 years. So we've heard so many comments and stories like Natalie's that we've been able to help others in their career path. And so again, I hope that from us talking about things like this in these types of videos, it inspires you to think outside the box. Because back when we were in physical therapy school, no one was talking about living an alternative lifestyle or an alternative career path. It was just like you get out and you get a 40-hour-a-week job and you work until you retire. And so when Jared started reading about these things and teaching me about it, I started to become inspired, and we just forged this path that I didn't even know existed. And now we've been able to inspire and help so many other people forge a path, not just like ours, but just how they wanted their life to look. And so we hope that you can look at this and think, okay, I can design my life how I want it to look and not be constrained until the government says I can get a Social Security check, right?
Yeah. Yeah, things have changed so much in 10 years, but when we were in school, people thought we were crazy for even wanting to travel, especially as new grads. That was like so crazy and unheard of, and everybody was saying, oh, it's a terrible idea. Much less, like, people couldn't even fathom the idea of taking 5 months off and traveling internationally like we did multiple times. So, like, that traditional path was just never really for us, but I think a lot of people don't even realize that that's something that you could even do.
Yeah, and I didn't. Again, I mean, like, even after we had been doing, we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about what we did. We worked for 3 years full time as travel therapists. And even when we got to that point of talking about maybe taking some time off, and at first we just talked about taking like a month off. And then it was like, well, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. And then we ended up taking off 6 months that year. It was scary for me because I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I've never met anyone else, much less, physical therapists with these like professional careers who take 6 months off and travel to Asia. Like, that just was unheard of.
Yeah.
Unless you were, just some kid, 18, taking a gap year until you start your career.
Or a really rich family or something.
Right. And so, yeah, it definitely was unheard of for us too, but we kind of just dove into it. So let's talk a little bit about what we did and then what we've done over the years.
Yeah, so we saved very aggressively. We traveled pretty much as soon as we could possibly travel after we graduated. We were trying to start on I think we graduated on Friday. We were trying to start on Monday if possible, and I think we had to wait 1 week. But we graduated, started traveling as soon as we possibly could with the goal, especially me, but Whitney as well, of trying to save as much as we possibly could. So for me, I was as extreme as I could be about it. I tried to spend as little as possible, tried to save as much as possible. That meant saving for the first 3 years of us traveling I was saving at least 80% of my income, my take-home pay every month, but some months 90%. So we were living pretty frugally. We lived in a camper for part of that time, but we kept our expenses extremely low, and yeah, tried to take as little time off as we could, save as much as possible. I worked overtime, started Fifth Wheel PT, started making a little bit of money, side hustles, things like that, credit card rewards, just various little ways to make more money. We did everything we could. So did that for 3 years, and then 2018, like we said, that was kind of like the start of semi-retirement for us, where we worked the first half of the year, and then we took the second half of the year off, spent 5 months traveling around the world, and then like 2 or 3 weeks at home at the end of that, and then jumped back into the semi-retirement, back into working another travel contract at the beginning of 2019.
And we didn't plan to do it that way at first. When Jared started learning about the financial independence movement, he ran some calculations and figured that he could probably get to his, they call it the 4% rule, that where he was saying you save 25%.
25 times your annual expenses.
25 times your annual expenses. And so he ran the math and thought that it would take him 5 years to achieve that goal. And so we thought that would be a good timeline too, because we just thought, okay, we'll do travel therapy back to back to back contracts the way that most travel therapists do, just continuously working throughout the year, most of the year, just like a normal therapist, 50 some weeks a year, maybe 48, take a couple weeks off for vacation. And we thought we would just do that consistently for 5 years. And by that time, we figured we will have seen enough of the US and done enough, cool things that we'll be ready to go back home and settle down. And at that time, Jared thought he would be fully retired, or maybe just work like a little bit of PRN or something when we moved back home.
Not have to work. That was the goal after 5 years, to not have to work if I didn't want to.
Right. And so I never dove into it as deeply as he did. I never tracked my finances to a T like he did. I was still saving pretty aggressively, probably 70% of my income, because most of our expenses were combined expenses. It's like we're both paying the same amount into rent and cars and all those types of things. But I just wasn't tracking it as aggressively as he was. So I kind of thought, well, I spend a little bit more. And I had a little bit more in like student loan debt. So I was like, I'll probably have to work at least part-time, and maybe I'll work like 30 hours a week or something when we settle down back at home. So that was the goal in the beginning. But after 3 years, we had actually gotten into a much better financial position than we even thought. It kind of like sped up quicker than we thought. And we got this idea to go on a trip that year. And I was like, why don't we just go ahead and take a little bit of time off? We've taken almost no time off. I mean, we'd maybe taken off like a week every year for the first 3 years. And so then that's when it was like, well, you know what, even though you haven't reached your FI number, is what they call it, the financial independence number, just yet, we could still just take a little bit of time off and then jump back into working and making money again on the next contract. And then that's where the concept of semi-retirement came about. And then our whole trajectory just changed after that. So that first year in 2018, we took a 5-month trip to Asia and Europe. And then we came back, worked one contract, and then immediately started planning our next big trip. So then we spent 4 months in Europe in 2019, came back, worked another contract to the end of 19 into the beginning of 20. And then we had another 5-month trip to South America, South and Central America planned. But then COVID happened. Back up, I skipped one thing. When we were in our very first trip in 2018 is when we started Travel Therapy Mentor. And so again, it wasn't even something we planned to ever have an online business. It just kind of happened. We had a blog. And then while we were traveling for fun in Asia in 2018, we had time and space to create and think. And we came up with Travel Therapy Mentor and turned it into more of a business.
And also by 2018, Fifth Wheel PT was making $1,000, $1,500 a month, which was pretty good for us then. Like that was a decent amount of extra money. And we were getting a lot of questions about specifically travel therapy. Like people didn't care so much about the financial independence or credit card rewards or the student loan stuff I wrote about. People did care about student loans, but mostly it was about travel therapy. So got tons and tons of questions about that. So that kind of pushed us in the direction of making more and more content about travel therapy. So we kind of branched off and started that.
So we started that in 2018. Then we were kind of doing that alongside taking some travel contracts, traveling for fun. And then when 2020 happened, we were home a lot more than we anticipated. We weren't able to go on our trip. So we dove even more into Travel Therapy Mentor and built it up more at that time. We worked at PRN a little bit at home. And then when travel started to come back a little bit in 21, we started traveling internationally for fun again, took another contract in 21. So pretty much in 21, 22, We took one contract each year. Actually, did we take one? Yeah, it was 22. 23, I don't think we took a contract at all.
Yeah.
And then in 24, we took one contract. And then in 25, we haven't taken any contracts this year because we just had a baby. So all through these years, we just worked less and less and less as physical therapists, did build a business on the side, traveled all over the world. We've now been to all 50 states. We've been to 63 national parks, all 63 national parks. We've been to over 50 countries internationally, and we've been to all 7 continents. So we have thoroughly traveled the world during our semi-retirement. And then we got married in 2023, went on one more like really big trip, and then had a baby at the end of 2024. So
We
now
actually went on 2 more big trips after that.
so anyway, we did all of the traveling in our semi-retirement, and now these days we have a 7-month-old baby, and so we're spending more time at home, not traveling as much. But now we're utilizing our semi-retirement to be able to spend as much time as a family as we would like to. So it's been a really amazing roller coaster ride for us. And one thing I want to mention as I'm saying all this is that some people will look at what we did and they'll say, oh, it's because you had an online business. You didn't retire, you just switched to a non-clinical role. But I want to make it clear that that's not necessarily true. All the math, everything that we did as far as financial independence and semi-retirement was just based on our travel therapy contracts. It wasn't based on earning this extra income. And it's funny because if you get involved in the not the travel therapy community, the financial independence community, for example, there's a podcast out there called Choose FI, and there's tons of other ones. Jared tells me from all these different people he listens to time and time again, a lot of them retire from their one career, but they still want to do something. So they end up creating something new. And then a lot of people, there'll be like naysayers. They're like, well, you didn't really retire because you still work, but they do this like fun thing on the side. And that's kind of what happened to us. It's like we were in the process of trying to semi-retire and pull back from being full-time clinicians. And then on the side, we ended up having time and space to build this thing. But that's not what allowed us to achieve the financial independence.
And I didn't realize this at the time, but anybody ambitious enough to save and invest and learn all these things and hustle enough to get to a point where, at 30 years old, I didn't have to work anymore. You're also going to be the type of person that doesn't just want to sit around. And so that's what we figured out is like, yes, we don't have to do anything, but there's still things that are fun to do, like things that we want to do. We want to help people. We want to get other people into traveling. And if we can make some money doing that, then who cares? Like not being retired or whatever, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So what we want to talk, that's a little bit of background about what we did and how we got to where we are. We're going to break down, more of the details of how could you accomplish this? Because if you're a therapist who's watching this, this is totally doable. We were not rich kids. We were not taught any of this financial independence information from our families. No one held our hand through this. We just learned it all on our own. Through like free podcasts, free blogs, the internet, AI. Now you have AI that could even help you probably learn it a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently than what we did. But you can do it just by being a travel therapist. You don't have to start a non-clinical business on the side in order to achieve financial independence as a therapist.
Yeah. So one thing I think it's important to say is that if we could go back now, we wouldn't have done things exactly like we did. And of course, there's a million different variables that can impact everyone's situation, and COVID was one of those things that kind of really threw all of our plans off, but I'm sure it did for everybody. But I don't think that if I could go back and do it again, knowing what I know now, I would not have been so aggressive in terms of saving those first few years. I think I would have probably taken more time off, and we would have kind of enjoyed the journey a little bit more instead of it being just such a focused thing for a short period of time. And the reason for that is, like I said, if you're the type of person that's ambitious enough to save 70, 80, 90% of your income, then you're probably not just going to get to this magic number and then not want to do anything. Like you're not going to just sit around and
retire to a beach.
Yeah,
like you're not just going to sit around.
It's very unrealistic. So I think taking your time and going a little slower, that is a big thing that we probably should have done. So, if we could go back, I think probably we should have started doing more of like a semi-retirement type of lifestyle, like 6 months on or 9 months off, 3 months off, 9 months on, 3 months off, something like that, probably after maybe a year of working, so that we had more time to travel each year and explore those first 3 years instead of kind of saving it up until we were done. I think we would have enjoyed it more, because one other thing we figured out is those really long trips. Like we did a 5-month trip, 4-month trip, we did several 3-month trips, a couple 2-month trips. those trips are very exhausting, and especially 5 months. We were very exhausted by the end of that trip. So if we could do it again, we would have done more short trips, so 2 to 3 months instead of 4 to 5 months, because at 2 months you're still really enjoying it. 3 months, it starts to get a little bit more draining, but going past that, it starts to get very difficult, especially if you're moving around often. So it would have been better if we, spread it out more.
Yeah, and we'll get into talking a little bit about some things that we've seen other travel therapists do. Again, it's not just us. I think that we've inspired a lot of people. Like a lot of people that have come after us have taken the information that we've given them and they've like, oh, I can apply this to my life in this way. And not to say that we were the first ones to figure out that you can use travel therapy to have a flexible lifestyle, but we definitely were among the first that were like blogging about it and like writing about it and showing it on social media. But yeah, there's all kinds of different people that have done all kinds of cool things utilizing the freedom that you gain through a travel therapy career. So let's talk a little bit about, what is special about a travel therapy career that can allow you to achieve this. So
we talked a little bit about this, but what makes travel so unique for this type of situation is that you can make a lot more money in a short period of time, and you have a lot more flexibility to take time off. So it's kind of perfect because I've read a few articles probably 6 or 7 years ago now about how you can make a permanent therapist salary working 6 months as a traveler. And I still think that's pretty accurate. It may be even more so now because travel contracts are paying even more and perm jobs really have not gone up that much. So if you're working 6 months a year, making on average maybe $2,200, $2,300 a week take home, that's more than a lot of people make working a full year at a perm job, which gives you 6 months of wiggle room to either to do what you want with, either to work more, to save more, or to take time off, or to do whatever. So being a traveler puts us in a very unique position, having that ability to make a lot of money in short spans and then be able to do whatever you want to do after that contract ends.
yeah, and so in addition to that, so high income is the big thing. Obviously, you're making a lot more money, so therefore you should be able to save a lot more money. Now, there are some people that will say, well, yes, but the expenses are also a lot higher now, but the pay packages are a lot higher now than when we started, especially if you're a physical therapist. This is still true, I would say, for nurses, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, but especially PTs right now are in such high demand. So if you're a physical therapist, you have an opportunity to make so much money right now as a travel therapist. Even with expenses being somewhat high because of inflation.
Yeah, I would say compared to when we started in 2015, expenses are probably up 30 or 40%, but the pay packages are probably up close to 50%. So apples to apples, comparing back then to now, I think it might be easier now, especially for a single traveler that's willing to take these really high paying contracts, probably even easier than ever to make and save a lot of money.
So you can make a ton of money as a travel therapist. In addition to that, you're getting tax benefits. So your pay is not taxed like it would be if you're a permanent therapist. So you're keeping a lot more of your money. In addition to that, it gives you flexibility with things like your student loan payments. If you decide to go on independent health insurance, like through the healthcare marketplace, it will affect your payment for that. So there's just some ways that as a traveler, you're keeping more of your money instead of paying it in taxes. So on the income side of things, you're making more money, so you should be able to save more money. Now, the other way that you're going to be able to achieve this is by trying to keep your expenses low. Now, not every travel therapist is coming out ahead financially because they're choosing not to keep their expenses low, which is fine. Some of them are just trying to enjoy their life and live it up, and this
see
is
new
only
places, see the place they want
yeah.
to see.
So for some people, they go into travel therapy because they know I'm only going to do this for a couple of years, and then I'm going to settle down into a permanent job and do that whole thing. And so I'm just going to really have a great time right now. I'm not too worried about my finances early. And that's totally fine. It's all about your priorities. But what we're trying to teach you here is that there are ways that if your priority is to set yourself up to have a better financial future, if you can make some sacrifices early on by keeping your expenses low, then you can really set yourself up for the future. And a big piece of that too, we're going to talk about is investing early in your career. But you definitely want to keep your expenses low so that your savings rate is high.
Yeah, so some people, when we talk about saving as much as we did, they think that's completely unreasonable. And I can understand, like, if you were trying to take contracts in DC or Austin or San Diego or whatever, like, yes, it is unreasonable. But our main goal, like I said, those first few years was to just make and save as much as we could. And as part of that, we were looking at the places that were the lowest cost of living or very low cost of living so that we knew we weren't going to spend much and we could still make decent money and save as much as we possibly could. So we were not like looking for the desirable areas. And our primary goal was to go to low cost living places that we could work outpatient. That was pretty much all we were looking for. And we kind of kept that lens every time we were looking for new states to go to or new jobs to take or whatever. So yeah, if you're looking for really desirable areas, you're not going to be able to save anywhere near what we did. But if you're willing to take some of these moderate to high paying jobs in really low cost of living areas that are rural, you can save a ton of money.
And again, you don't have to do everything to the extreme that we did it. Now, the first 3 years when we were trying to make and save as much as possible, we only worked on the East Coast. And that was so that we didn't actually plan to do it that way. It just kind of kept working out that way because we were trying to take contracts back to back to back. We would finish a contract on a Friday, start a new one on a Monday. And we didn't drive too far between them. I think the furthest we ever drove was like 14 hours.
Well, we kind of didn't do that on purpose, but we also did kind of do it on purpose. And we kept coming back to within 4 or 5 hours of Virginia because of the tax home rules. So we wanted to be able to work as much as possible, not take much time off, but we also wanted to be close enough that we could come home on weekends for, holidays, birthdays, that kind of stuff, and still qualify for, meet our 30-day requirement for tax home. So there was years where we only took 1 week off, which is only 7 days, but we would take a bunch of weekend trips home or long weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that, work 10 hours a day, Monday through Thursday, to then get more days at home. So it was kind of intentional, kind of unintentional, but yeah, we did take most of our contracts within probably 4 or 5 hours of home.
I would say initially we didn't know that's what we were going to do, but it just kind of kept happening. And it was kind of, our goals shifted. So initially we thought we were going to go across the country for contracts and do all these things, go out to California, go to Texas. And we ended up not doing that because our goals just shifted. But what I'm saying is you don't have to do it that way. Now you could try to take the majority of your contracts where you're in a good financial position and you're making good money, and then take, one that's more like, I want to go to this destination. And that's kind of what we ended up doing too. Like in the beginning, we saved aggressively and took a lot of our jobs closer to home. We did take the furthest away we went, like I said, was like 14 hours. It was to Massachusetts from Virginia. But the other ones we took all around Virginia and North Carolina. But later on, once we had achieved semi-retirement and financial independence, we took Hawaii and Alaska contracts, and we took road trips out to cool places like San Diego and Austin and Seattle and all these national parks and things. So we just kind of delayed gratification on that part of our travel journey. But again, we're just telling you kind of what we did, and there's lots of different ways that this might look for you.
Yeah.
But essentially the principles are going to be high income, low expenses. So trying to save as much as you possibly can by keeping your fixed costs low. So for you, this might look like if you're coming out of school, especially starting, try not to get a lot of consumer debt. Try not to get like a big car payment. Do what you need to do to take care of your student loans, to try to keep your student loan payment low. Jared's written a lot about student loans and how we utilize the income-driven repayment plans. And again, there's some kind of little hacks there you can use with your low taxable income as travel therapists in order to keep your student loan payment low using the income-driven repayment.
Yeah, not to go too much into that because, yeah, a lot of times when we talk about this stuff, people think that we had no student loans or our family paid for college or whatever like that. But the truth is we still have our student loans. It's just that we chose to go on these income-driven repayment plans, have very low payments, and invest a ton of money instead. And at the time, we were definitely a little nervous about that. But now, in 10 years in hindsight, that was one of the best decisions we ever made. We still have our loans, but the amount of money we would have put towards our loans has now grown more than 100% in these last years in the market with the investments that we have. So that's not for everyone. It's definitely a little bit more risky, and but it is a big reason why we were able to do what we did, and a big reason why we were able to save as much money as we did. Because otherwise, if we had to pay $1,000 or $1,500 a month towards student loans, of course we couldn't save 80% of our income. But we kept our payments extremely low by taking travel contracts, keeping our AGI low, maxing out our retirement accounts. So our payments were always less than $100 a month, which made a huge difference. And then we had all that extra money to invest instead.
Yeah, so I would say that's a big piece of why we were able to do it so quickly and so aggressively in the beginning. However, if that's not the path that you want to go down, we know lots of travel therapists that instead buckled down, paid off their loans in the first 2-3 years, and then flipped over to taking their savings to start investing. Or they did a kind of a hybrid method where they were paying down their loans pretty aggressively, much more aggressive than the 10-year standard repayment, maybe like in 5 years, while still investing some along the way. The earlier you can start investing in your career, the more you're going to take advantage of compound interest. So it's going to grow and grow and grow and grow for you, rather than waiting until you're 5 or 10 years in your career to start putting the first dollar into your investment account. So again, there's lots of different ways that you can do this, but it can be done via the high pay, the tax breaks of being a travel therapist, via trying to keep your income or your expenses low, have a high savings rate, and then take care of your debt, and just use some different financial strategies.
Yep.
So that's just a general overview of like how this can be done, how you could do it too. If you want to learn more about the details of all that, I would definitely recommend going and checking out the Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist blog, where Jared writes in a lot more detail about all that. Or you can also shoot us a message if you have questions. There's a couple more people tuning in live. Somebody else commented. I think that's Andrew. Good afternoon. Thanks for your content and recruiter recommendations. It helped last month when my PT contract extension was abruptly canceled. Sorry to hear that happen, but I'm glad that we were able to help. If anybody else is watching live, if you have questions about what we're talking about or want to leave us a comment, please feel free.
I guess one other thing that probably people are wondering is, if we kept our expenses so low, how were we able to travel so much? And it's a good question, because if you told me, especially 10 years ago, that we'd be able to go to 56 countries, all the states, all the national parks, while still saving a ton of money, I would have never believed it. But I tracked all of our expenses from all of these trips on the Fifth Wheel PT website. So every international trip we took, I kept track of every expense I had, all of our road trips to the national parks, our trip to Alaska, our trip to Hawaii. I've got expenses and wrote about all the expenses I had for all of those trips. So you can see how we did it and how we kept our expenses very low. But you can actually travel way, way cheaper than you think, especially if you utilize credit card points. Miles and hotel nights and stuff like that has really saved us. I would imagine between flights and hotels, we've probably saved $100,000 in 10 years. So it can be a huge, huge savings doing it that way.
Yeah, we use credit card rewards for all of our leisure travel. And then as far as saving money during our travel therapy contracts, as Jared mentioned, trying to take contracts in lower cost of living areas with higher pay packages or moderate pay packages. It does help that we split rent, but you can definitely achieve it as a solo traveler, as an individual, because a lot of solo travelers we know will rent smaller places than what we would need. Maybe they would even rent a room in a house so that they can save money that way. Of course, if you're a solo traveler who really feels like you need to have your own apartment and you need to have your own one bedroom, yes, your expenses are going to be a little bit higher there, but there's definitely still ways that you can budget and try to keep your expenses low in order to achieve these financial goals.
Yep.
All right, so want to talk about some different scenarios. Obviously, what we did was a bit aggressive. We worked full-time for 3 years, then immediately went into like a 6-month on, 6-month off, and then it turned into a only working 3 months out of the year as PTs kind of thing. There's lots of other travelers that we know that do it less aggressively than that, but still have a really amazing, flexible lifestyle. So we know so many people that will work 1, 3, or 6-month travel contract, and then they'll take either a couple weeks or maybe even a month off before taking the next one. And that still allows you to have such amazing trips and experiences. Maybe you go home for 2 weeks and see family, and then you go to Europe for 2 weeks, or 3 weeks or a month. And then you come back and you take another travel
and then maybe
contract.
You take a road trip out to your next contract, and it's across the country, and you get to see a lot of national parks and things that way. That's kind of more the traditional way, I would say, that most travelers did things, especially before we came along and started writing about crazy things, is people would be like, oh yeah, I take a 3-month contract, I take 3 weeks off, I go home for a week, I do a road trip for a couple weeks, and it's really great, and I get to see a lot of stuff. So that's definitely more of a sort of like a semi-retirement type thing, but of course, a lot less time off.
Mm-hmm. Or say you get to a point where you have pretty good financial stability, but you only want to take maybe 3 months off. Maybe you work 6 months, take 3 months off, take another 6 months. That's still way more time than anyone in history usually takes off. And so you're still having an amazing semi-retirement lifestyle, but it's just a little bit less aggressive so that you have more time to build your savings and your wealth and pay down your debts. So there's lots of different ways you could design it. Like Jared said, probably what we recommend for most people, the majority of travelers we talk to start when they're young, start maybe right out of school or a couple of years out of school. And then they plan on traveling for a few years and then going into a permanent job. That's the majority of what we hear. So if you wanted to do like that, we would recommend probably work full-time back-to-back-to-back contracts for the first year. so that you build up a good nest egg, a good savings, start getting your investments going, start getting your financial stability in place.
And you're coming out of being a student, you already have low expenses, just try to keep them low, try to take these high paying jobs, low cost living areas, save as much as you can, and then you get yourself in a pretty good situation after that first year to have a decent amount saved and invested, or depending on what you want to do with your student loans, maybe you put a big dent in your student loans as well.
And so we recommend probably working at least a year full-time back-to-back contracts before you start living this flexible lifestyle, just so you get things grounded as far as your finances go. And then maybe for the next 2 years, you do like a semi-retirement, like longer gaps off, and then maybe you go into your permanent job and settle down and have a family after that. But there are lots of people that don't ever plan to settle down and have a family. Maybe they plan to continue to be travelers or utilize travel therapy in some way throughout their career, kind of like we have. We've heard of so many different stories where some people continued to work contracts. Maybe they took 6 months of contracts, 6 months at home indefinitely, or they only worked contracts, kind of close to home, so that way they could still have a house and a family, and they would only be gone sometimes. Or maybe they take their family on the road with them. We have heard people taking their family on the road with them. So there's lots of different ways this could look, and you could utilize the flexibility of travel therapy contracts.
Yep. Or you do something like you take summers off. You work 9 months a year, but you take the summers off, whether you have kids or not, and travel or do whatever you want to do during that time. And that works really well for some people too.
Yeah, that could work especially well for some people that do travel school contracts. So if you work with pediatrics and you work in schools, you could do it that way, work a school contract and then take the summers off. So there's a lot of different ways that you could make this look and make it work, but you need to use these basic financial principles to get yourself into the good financial position while doing it. So I think, one question that we had gotten is, what's the update now? What is our life going to look like now? So we've traveled off and on for about 9 years before deciding to have a family. And so now that we took our last travel therapy contract last year while I was pregnant, and then we came home for the rest of my pregnancy, and we've pretty much been home since the end of my pregnancy. I guess it's been about a year now that we've been home. Yep. Now we've taken several little trips, what we consider little trips, which is funny because
conferences and stuff.
Some people are like, well, you're traveling so much with your baby. And we're like, yeah, but not really. I mean, we went to Texas for a conference. We went to Pennsylvania for a conference. And we went to South Carolina or Georgia to go to the beach. So we've been on a couple, like what we consider little trips. We haven't taken our baby and gone, to Asia for 5 months, for example. And we haven't taken our baby and gone on a travel physical therapy contract. But we've done a little bit of like traditional travel with our baby. But for the most part, we've been home. And so we're kind of still figuring out what we want our life to look like. It's been harder than we thought it was going to be to travel with a baby. I think it'll probably get easier. I don't know. I don't know if it ever gets easier. I mean, we talk to people that travel with a baby or travel with an older kid, and they're like, you just kind of adapt, and it's a different type of travel. So we're still trying to figure out what we want our lives to look like. But in the meantime, like I said, we did start an online business, Travel Therapy Mentor. And so now we work basically part-time on that. Currently, we're not working as physical therapists. I probably will start going back to PRN at some point, but right now I'm really enjoying being able to be home and basically be a stay-at-home mom. Stay at home and work from home part-time. But yeah, we're not working clinically right now. It's been about a year since either of us I guess I worked a little bit PRN during my pregnancy. Yep. But it's probably been a year since you were working clinically.
Yep. So we still consider ourselves like semi-retired as far as that goes, because we're still working on the business, maybe, I don't know, 2 to 4 hours a day, just depending on what's going on. But just don't have to go to the clinic, don't have to be out of the house. Don't have to do anything if you don't want to, but it's just nice to have something to work on.
Yep. So we choose to work part-time right now, but as far as our financial independence status, we could not work at all anymore if we would like to. I'm 35 and Jared's 36. And so basically just from being traveling physical therapists and implementing these financial strategies early on, we got to the point where in our 30s, we no longer had to work anymore. We could just live off of our savings.
Yeah, and I will say that we are from a relatively low cost of living area in Virginia. So if we lived, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody, but if we grew up in New York City and we wanted to live in New York City, or we grew up in San Diego and we wanted to live there, or, more expensive areas, that would not be the case. But because our hometown is not that expensive, and we don't have high expenses back home, then it was a lot easier to get there than it might be for some other people.
And we went on a hike this morning with our baby, and we were talking about it, and we were like, our hobbies and things, we don't like to spend that much money. And when we do travel, like we're getting ready to take a trip up to see some friends in Wisconsin next month, and like we're using airline miles, and we're staying with friends, but if we weren't, we would use hotel points. So we travel very frugally and we live very frugally. We still do amazing things. We don't sacrifice anything that we want to do. We just find strategies to make it less expensive.
Yep.
So as far as like the update on what we're doing, this has been the goal all along. I mean, back then, we even thought after 5 years of traveling that we were going to use the financial independence to be able to settle down and have a family. And we thought it would look a little more traditional than it does look. We thought that we would have, somewhat permanent jobs or PRN jobs. But the goal all along was to be able to not have to work full time, so we'd have more flexibility to spend as a family. And now we are cashing in on that goal. Now we have the ultimate and the flexibility to spend time with our daughter and do whatever we would like to do.
Yep. And we talk about all the time now that we haven't worked for quite a while, is like worked in the clinic. It's so funny how whatever amount of time you have, whatever things are going on, you feel like you're busy. So we have more time than most parents ever have, and we still feel like the days are kind of busy. So you can always find things to fill your time for sure. And so even though we only work a couple hours a day mostly on the business stuff, it's like we still feel like most of our days are pretty full, and there's endless things you can do with the baby and play with her all day. And so yeah, there's plenty of things to fill your time for sure.
Well, shout out to all the stay-at-home parents. It's not quite as easy as we thought. I mean, trying to like make meals, keep the house up, take care of the baby, have time for yourself, have time to go to the gym, much less have any hobbies, see friends and family occasionally. It's like, wow, your day is really full.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, most people do all of that and then still work full time. And we're like, oh, you must just not sleep at all, because if you're working full time and maybe you have a long commute and also you just don't see your kids much.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Like we talk about it a lot. Like we see our baby more than most people who work full time, especially if both of you work full time, get to see your child. So yeah, that's the update, is that, all of this has come to fruition. All of these years of learning about finance and trying to implement these financial strategies, we've, achieved this lifestyle that looks like exactly like what we want it to look like. So it's been pretty incredible. And, we hope that that's inspiring to you to know that we were just PT students, just like you.
A lot of money in student loans.
So much student loan debt, no money in savings at all. Like I didn't have any money to even pay like our first month's rent as travel therapists. So, we came from pretty much the same starting point that a lot of you are coming from, and you can achieve these goals if they're the goals that you have. It depends on your priorities.
Yeah.
But there's so much that you can implement and strategize, and hopefully maybe you can use travel therapy to help you get there.
Yep.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you're watching later or listening later, you can just send us a message or comment on the YouTube video if you have questions. I can also link to the older video we did on this topic where we may have touched on some different points that we forgot to touch on today. But yeah, I would recommend that you guys go and check out the Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist site if you want to delve more into financial strategies as a therapist.
Especially the student loan articles. I spent a lot of time on those articles. I think there's probably 6 or 7 articles on there about why we decided to do what we did, the math behind it, and it's worked out. I've also kept track of how much I'm ahead every year versus if we had paid off the loans as we went early on. So it's kind of cool to see how after now, the last update I did was 2 years ago. So that was after 8 years. I think I was over $120,000 ahead at that point. And now it's probably 160, 170,000. I got to update that again this year. But if you're interested in doing something similar in terms of student loans, then that's a good thing to check out.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there are no questions, we will get off here, and hope you guys have a great weekend, and reach out if you have any questions later on.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
Bye.